Welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. And now, here's Chris McCann.
Good evening and welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Bible study in the book of Genesis. Tonight is study number 27 in Genesis chapter 35, and we're reading from verse 22. And it came to pass when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and Simeon, and Levi, and Judah, and Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. And the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's handmaid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob, which were born to him in Padan Aram. And I'll stop reading there. In our last study, we began to look at this historical situation that verse 22 mentions almost in passing. It came to pass when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. And then we're given the list of the 12 sons and born to the various women, the various wives of Jacob. Nothing else is said, but last time, remember, we went to Genesis 49, and we read in Genesis chapter 49 that it was not forgotten at all by Jacob as he is giving the final benediction, the final blessings and admonishment to his sons. And we read in verse 3, Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power, unstable as water, thou shalt not excel. Because thou wentest up to thy father's bed, then defilest thou it, he went up to my couch. So we looked at the word unstable and saw it identifies with light, like vain and light persons, or light and treacherous persons. And the word excel is the word left or remain that identifies with God's elect who are left as a remnant. But to not excel or not be left is a very serious matter. And that points to coming under the judgment of God. Because thou wentest up to thy father's bed, then defilest thou it. He went up to my couch. And we also saw in 1 Chronicles chapter 5 how serious a matter this actually was, as we read in verse 1 of 1 Chronicles 5. Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but for as much as he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given unto the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, and the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright. Okay, so we clearly see Reuben lost the blessing of the firstborn son, just as Esau had done before him. And the reason is given because, or for as much as he defiled his father's bed. Same thing Genesis 49 verse 4 told us, and it's the same word, defiled. And this word defiled reveals a lot. If we go to Leviticus chapter 18, Leviticus 18, I'll start reading in verse 6. And it says there, none of you shall approach to any that is near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness. I am Jehovah. the nakedness of thy father or the nakedness of thy mother, thou shalt not uncover. She is thy mother. Thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. The nakedness of thy father's wife shalt thou not uncover. It is thy father's nakedness. And here it is important to make this distinction that Reuben went into his father's wife, his father's concubine, not Reuben's mother. Reuben's mother was Leah. And yet God says in Leviticus 18:7 that if one did go into his father's mother, that would be a sinful thing that is forbidden. You're not to uncover the nakedness of your mother. But likewise, in the very next verse, the nakedness of thy father's wife or his concubine shalt thou not uncover. It is thy father's nakedness. And that's something we'll see repeated several times concerning going into one's father's wife is, in a sense, uncovering your father's nakedness. And in this chapter, in Leviticus 18, following verse 8, there's a whole list of various kin relationships, family relationships, and God makes the same statement. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a brother, sister, mother, and so forth. And then when we get to the end of this passage, in verse 19, it says also, thou shalt not approach unto a woman to uncover her nakedness, as long as she is put apart for her uncleanness. Moreover, thou shalt not lie carnally with thy neighbor's wife, to defile thyself with her. And thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Molech, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am Jehovah. And the word profane is the word defiled that was in 1 Chronicles 5:1 and also in Genesis 49:4. And I think this is sort of a closing statement as far as these family relations are concerned. In other words, it's not just letting your seed pass through the fire to Molech that profanes the name of God, but so too would be lying with thy father's wife and any of the sins that are listed in the previous verses. This is something that defiles, profanes the name of God. And therefore it is forbidden. It is against the law of God. And in Leviticus 20, we read in verse 11, and the man that lieth with his father's wife hath uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And there we see just how serious a matter this is. If a man were caught or found out to lie with his father's wife, it's something that is said to have uncovered his father's nakedness, and we'll look at that a little later to try and understand that. That's actually the key to understanding this whole thing spiritually. But if this happens, both the son and the wife of the father, the concubine, are to be put to death. Their blood will be upon them. That is, they're guilty. They're guilty. They have broken the law of God in this way, and God's law condemns them to die, and they will be responsible for their own death. They have brought this upon themselves. And so we see it here. Also, if we go over to Deuteronomy chapter 22, we find a similar law. Deuteronomy 22, verse 30 says, a man shall not take his father's wife, nor discover his father's skirt. So it's just laying down the law. It doesn't say the judgment, but actually any law of God, if transgressed, brings death, doesn't it? The wages of sin is death, and sin is that which transgresses the law. Also in Deuteronomy, in chapter 27, Deuteronomy 27, verse 20, and you probably didn't realize just how much the Bible speaks about this. I know I didn't. In Deuteronomy 27, verse 20, "Cursed be he that lieth with his father's wife, because he uncovereth his father's skirt." And all the people shall say, Amen. After reading these verses, we can see just how bad and grievous a thing this was for Reuben, not only a son, but the firstborn son, to lie with his father's wife. It was truly terrible, and Jacob heard it. Now, why, if Jacob heard it, why wasn't Reuben and Bilhah put to death? Well, we don't know, actually. Keep in mind that Deuteronomy is the law of God as God revealed it to Moses, and Moses is writing it down. And we often see various things in the historical account of Genesis that relate to the law, and sometimes there's an understanding of the law, that God must have revealed to the people, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and some others that we're reading about. They had this good understanding of certain aspects of the law, but that doesn't mean that they understood all the law or had the various judgments and condemnations for offending and breaking the law in their understanding. That, in other words, Jacob knew it's very wrong, it's very bad, and against the law of God that my son has laid with my wife, Bilhah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he knew that the penalty was to be the death penalty, and that both Reuben and Bilhah were to die. It's not really spelled out anywhere else in the Bible, except the Bible does tell us the wages of sin is death. And actually, when we look at finally the judgment of Jacob the father, yes, it's the judgment of God, but it's coming through Jacob. Jacob is carrying out this judgment by the things that he said in Genesis 49 concerning Reuben, his firstborn, that he had gone into his bed and he be unstable as water and not excel. That's indicating that there is a fulfillment of the law, which is the loss of the birthright. And spiritually, the loss of the birthright does tie in to spiritual death and losing the inheritance of God and the blessings of God. And so Reuben, we can understand, was slain in that way, according to the law, and was cursed, as it says here in Deuteronomy 27:20. Cursed be he that lieth with his father's wife. He experienced the curse in the loss of the birthright. Well, see, this also helps us to understand another historical situation. And we now, I think, looking at these verses and seeing just, again, how very serious it is to lie with one's father's wife, we can understand some of the language we find in 2 Samuel chapter 16 concerning Absalom. When he received wicked counsel, according to circumstances, it may have been wise worldly counsel, but it was certainly wicked against the commandments of God. In 2 Samuel 16, starting in verse 20, then said Absalom to Ahithophel, give counsel among you what we shall do. Now the situation is that they have come in rebellion, Absalom and many of the forces of Israel, against David and driven him out of Jerusalem. And now, what should I do? What is the next step? Absalom is asking this counselor. And here's the answer in verse 21. And Ahithophel said unto Absalom, go in unto thy father's concubines, which he has left to keep the house, and all Israel shall hear that thou art abhorred of thy father. Then shall the hands of all that are with thee be strong. And in verse 22, so they spread Absalom a tent upon the top of the house, and Absalom went in unto his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. This is about as bad as anything can get. It's just horrible that not only has a son gone into his father's wives, but he did it on the rooftop in full view of the whole kingdom, of all Israel, so that everybody would know. And of course, he would be abhorred of his father. And the word abhorred there is also translated, I think, as abomination and as stinking savor. It's just awful, very, very awful. And now we know why, because it was a violation of the law of God. It was not only disrespecting one's father, certainly not honoring your father, but it was also uncovering thy father's nakedness. The father's nakedness. And Absalom uncovered his father David's nakedness in this way. And Reuben uncovered his father Jacob's nakedness. Well, Lord willing, when we get together in our next Bible study, we're going to try and understand that. We're going to look at the spiritual meaning, and it's also terrible on the spiritual level. And we'll also see how it applies to the New Testament churches and congregations. And it has to do with one of the reasons why God brought judgment upon the church and ended the church age. It all fits in with this particular sin of going in unto one's father's wife.
Thank you for joining us for E-Bible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies and information, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. Until our next Bible study, may the Lord's perfect will be done.